Section 6. Antecedent rivers. A significant instance of this kind is found in Powell's famous discussion of the course of the Green River through the Uinta Mountains. He wrote, quote, "The river had the right of way. In other words, it was running ere the mountains were formed, not before the rocks, of which the mountains are composed, were deposited, but before the formations were folded, so as to make a mountain range. The emergence of the fold above the general surface of the country was little or no faster than the general progress of the corrasion of the channel. The river was the saw which cut the mountains in two. The summit of the fold slowly emerged until the lower beds of sandstone were lifted to the altitude at first occupied by the upper beds, and if these upper beds had not been carried away, they would now be found more than 24,000 feet above the river." End quote. Colorado River Paper 152 and 153. This is an admirable statement of a great idea. It bears not only upon the processes of river evolution, but upon the fundamental principles of geology. It is a welcome reinforcement of the arguments for uniformitarianism, which, though valiantly urged by Hutton, Playfair, and Lyell regarding processes of erosion and deposition, were even later than the middle of the 19th century not entirely successful in vanquishing the widespread traditional belief in violent processes of deformation and upheaval. Powell's demonstration, as he thought it, that the Uinta Mountains were not lifted up faster than the Green River could cut its canyon down through their broad anticline, had great influence in convincing his contemporaries that uplift, as well as erosion and deposition, is a slow process, and thus aided the gentle doctrine of geological peace on Earth gained a vast backward extension into periods of the past that had long been conceived as ages of violence. It was to rivers which, like the Green and the Uintas, had held their course through an area of adverse uplift that Powell gave the excellent name of antecedent. He appears to have made no search whatever to learn whether other observers had come upon the same idea. Not that he was in the least disposed to claim priority by neglecting their labors, but that he was fully engrossed in his own. In a thorough review of this problem, Pink points out that Medlicott in India and Hayden in the United States had both preceded Powell in recognizing the persistence of certain rivers and holding their courses through slowly uplifted mountain ranges. Medlicott inferred the long persistence of certain rivers and the slow, imperceptible progress of deformation and uplift because of marked correspondence between the distribution of the accumulations of conglomerate, ancient Piedmont river deposits, and the position of actual river gorges through the outer ranges of the Himalayas. Some of the upturned conglomerates are, quote, as thick and at as high angles as those on the Rigi in the Alps. The Sutlej in particular is instanced as having held its course from a time before the outer or sub-Himalayan ranges were raised. After issuing from deep valleys and lofty inner ranges, it passes through low hills of soft rocks and then trenches a ridge formed of massive beds of coarse conglomerate of boulders, such as only occur in the main river channels. These beds are now raised to the vertical, and in both directions along the strike, these conglomerates pass gradually within a few miles into the ordinary sandstones. The presumption from such a coincidence seems irresistible that the Sutlej itself had deposited these banks of boulders at the spot where it still flows. Hayden's statement, based on studies in Montana, is as follows, quote, The fact that the streams seem to have cut their way directly through mountain ranges instead of following synclinal depressions indicates that they began the process of erosion at the time of the commencement of the elevation of the surface. This is shown all along the valley of the Yellowstone, and more conspicuously in the valleys of the Madison and Gallatin, which have carved immense canyons or gorges directly through two of the loftiest ranges of mountains in Montana. We believe that the course of these streams was marked out at or near the close of the Cretaceous period, and as the ranges of mountains were in process of elevation to their present height, the erosion of the channels continued. The details of the observations which contribute to form this opinion would occupy a chapter or two. End quote. Report of F.B. Hayden, 6th Report, U.S. Geological Survey of the Territories for 1872. Both of these authors, however, treated the problem of persistent rivers in an incidental manner, subordinating it to other larger topics. Neither of them gave an elaborate or an emphatic statement to his theory, and neither of them invented a handy and suggested generic name for the kind of rivers that they explained. The taking term antecedent was a forcible supplement to the explanation of the profound idea involved in Powell's report, and this may be fairly taken to show that, notwithstanding the adverse opinion often inappropriately quoted to the contrary from the emotional pleading of a charming heroine, there is really matter of much import in a name. But Powell's further argument in support of the antecedents of Green River through the Uinta Mountains includes, curiously enough, the case of certain streams which follow valleys excavated in belts of weak strata along the flanks of the range. Had the range been suddenly uplifted, these streams should, according to Powell, follow the dip of the strata. As they followed the strike instead of the dip, the uplift must have been gradual. Quote, "The direction of the streams is indubitable evidence that the elevation of the fold was so slow as not to divert the streams. Had the fold been uplifted more rapidly, all the smaller streams and waterways should have been cataclinal," end quote, flowing down the dip. Hence, quote, "The drainage was established antecedent to the corrugation or displacement of the beds by faulting and folding," end quote. Colorado River Paper 163. The same argument is used with respect to the drainage lines of the Arizona plateaus. Quote, "All the facts concerning the relation of the waterways of this region to the mountains, hills, canyons, and cliffs lead to the inevitable conclusion that the system of drainage was determined antecedent to the faulting and folding and erosion which are observed, and antecedent also to the formation of the eruptive beds and cones." End quote. Yet the longitudinal valleys, here referred to as so decisive in the discussion of antecedents, are apparently of the kind that had been explained 10 years earlier, 1862, by Jukes from his studies of the Blackwater in southern Ireland, as having been slowly developed by headward or retrogressive erosion along the strike of weak beds. Thus interpreted, they indicate slow adjustment of streams to structures and probably do not bear on the problems of antecedents at all. This is not the place for further discussion of Green River, regarding which the theory of superposition, suggested by Emmons, merits consideration along with Powell's theory of antecedents. It indeed seems possible that Green River, which was described as a type of antecedent rivers when that term was introduced, may be otherwise explained, so that its place as type will be taken by a better proved example of antecedents. such as the Meuse and the Ardennes. This fate of a type is, however, not so very rare. The uplands of southern New England, described some 20 years ago as the type of an uplifted and dissected lowland of erosion, for which the name peneplain was then suggested, may, like Green River, have to yield their place to a better proved example. The object in here pointing out the invalidity of Powell's argument is to show that even when a mind as original and powerful as his works in a field as inspiring as that of the Uinta Mountains, trenched by the canyon of the Green River, there is danger in overlooking, as Powell too often did, the work of earlier investigators on similar problems. It would be no more fitting to omit mention of this characteristic shortcoming of method from an account of Powell's work than to paint out a wrinkle in a true picture of his rugged and kindly face. But in any case, whether the Green River followed its present course antecedent to the uplift of the Uintas or not, and whether any other geologist preceded Powell in recognizing the occurrence elsewhere of rivers of this origin, it is distinctly to Powell that geology now owes the general acceptance of the idea of antecedents in river development. End of section 6.